he might have been in a far more better position to defend himself. So he tells his disciples strategically in Matthew's Gospel, sit here while I go and pray yonder, and he left 11 at the gates. 11, sit here and watch. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he says, sit here and watch. And he prays, and he asks God, he says, sit here. He began to be very sorrowful, and he said, oh my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. And he went a little further and fell on his face and he prayed to God. And being in more agony, the sweat dropped as if great drops of blood fell on the ground. And one cynic had stated, if such person cries, even God himself would have basically come down from his throne. Now, all of this, once he finishes his prayer, he comes to the front and he finds his disciples sleeping. And he says, why could you not watch with me even 1 hour? 1 hour you can't watch and sit with me? And he goes back to pray. And then he comes back again and he sees his disciples are sleeping again. Neither knew they what they to answer him. And then he left them and he basically goes. Luke says they were sleeping of sorrow. But if you look at physics, they tell you that in sorrow or excitement, the adrenal gland chases away all aspects of sleep. In Hebrews chapter 5 verse 7, after Jesus' prays to God to help him, what does God say? Who in the days of his flesh, when he offered up praise and supplications, with strong crying and tears, unto him that was able to save him from death and was heard in that he feared. What do you mean when we say God heard his prayers? Meaning God accepted his prayers, and there appeared unto him an angel strengthening him. Now, the problem is that the Jews had been more wily. They had brought along Roman soldiers. And so he knew that against Roman soldiers, armed Roman soldiers, there would be no match. So he changes. When the armed Roman soldiers come and someone strikes one of the sword, I think the high priest, the ear, Jesus says, put down the sword, for he that takes the sword shall perish by the sword. Why did he ask for swords initially? If he says put down the sword, well, the strategy changes. He was originally expecting a Jewish oligarchy, a clandestine arrest. Now he has to deal with Roman soldiers, so the strategy changes. What then happened? At the most critical time, at the most critical point, all his disciples forsook him and fled. In fact, Professor Walmer confesses that at that particular point in time, his immediate disciples were always misunderstanding him and his words, wanting him to declare himself God, wanting him to sit on the right hand and the left of the kingdom, wanting him to show them the Father, to make God visible to their bodily eyes, wanting him to do and wanting to do themselves anything that was incompatible with the great plan. That was how they treated him till the end. When that came, they all forsook him and fled. They were not there. And then they had kangaroo courts. They take him to Caiaphas, the high priest. He had already predetermined that Jesus must die. But they needed Roman consent. The Jews accused him of blasphemy. Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. The Jewish expectation of the Messiah at no point in time identified the Christ with being divine. Son of God is also a harmless expression in the Old and the New Testament. But they knew that the so-called blasphemy would not mean much with Pontius Pilate and the Romans. And they needed Roman consent. So they take him to Pilate. Pilate takes him to Herod. After discovering that Jesus was a Galilean, Herod sends him back to Pilate. Pilate asks him, art thou the king of the Jews? What does Jesus say? Does he remain silent? He says, my kingdom is not of this world. For if my kingdom were of this world, my disciples would fight, or my people would fight, and they would assist me. But my kingdom is not of this world. No Queen's Counsel in London or Senior Counsel in Durban could have done a better job of defending himself. So it belies the notion that Jesus never opened his mouth. He did defend himself. If you look at the Gospels, he says, my kingdom is not of the world. So Pilate says, well, if that's the case, I find no fault in him at all. What do the Jews do? Pilate had a dream, his wife had a dream. This man, see that no harm comes to him. He's innocent. The Jews say, well, if you allow this man to go, then you are not a friend to Caesar, because he himself states that he is a king. That allegation was false. They accused him of committing blasphemy. When they come to the Romans, they accuse him of calling himself a king, committing treason. Jesus has said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render unto God the things that are God's. So at the end of the day, they blackmail Pilate, and Pilate wipes his hands off and hands him over to the Jews. I have nothing to do, I've got nothing to do with the blood of this particular man, and they then basically crucify him, and they take him to Golgotha. Now, I dealt with earlier the issue of the centurion saw that he was dead already. He saw that he was dead in John's Gospel, John 19:33, and he decided not to break his legs. What did he see? Did he see or did he surmise? Did they have any stethoscope to verify his death? Did anyone touch or feel his pulse? The word saw can also be another plan or another step in God's plan to save Jesus. With all the advancements in medical science, hundreds of people are being certified dead today and are still being viewed as alive. Look at this in the Daily News from 55. A little girl who died tells us she came back to life after 4 days. Man died after 2 hours, still lives. He died for 4 minutes. Man's heart stops, but he lives on. Back from the dead after being thought dead for 2 days. Corpse winks at undertaker. Doctor wrote out death certificate. Was he dead or alive? Dilemma facing transplant doctors in the Sunday Tribune. Under medical science, you make mistakes. They can't certify. This is an undertaker's nightmare. You have the dead society, the society of people who had died in inverted commas and they come back to life. Meaning really that were they resurrected or were they resuscitated? What were they? So when the centurion says he saw, is it possible that he could have surmised and therefore Pilate marveled that at that particular point in time he had perhaps died, they couldn't be sure? Because at that point in time there was also an earthquake, there was lightning, there was an eclipse of the sun. At that point in time, and a Roman soldier, not a trained Roman physician or medical man, he just makes this declaration, Jesus is dead, and that's it. They just simply accept it at face value, Jesus is dead. In fact, many people refer to the writings of Josephus, and these people are 2nd century and so on. If Jesus had survived the cross, and he comes down, and he goes to the tomb, and he dies in the tomb, what would the historian write? The historian would write that Jesus was crucified. Why? Because he couldn't ascertain at what point in time Jesus died. Even if he died at another point in time. So the idea of secular historians, or certain secular historians, basically stating that Jesus had been crucified doesn't prove really anything. Bearing in mind that at that point in time, there were an eclipse, thunderstorm, and so on. Now, the problem is this, is that we're given to understand that between the 6th and the 9th hours when Jesus was on the tomb, there was an eclipse and an earthquake to disperse the sadistic mob. Joseph of Arimathea, basically with the centurion, he makes an arrangement with the so-called disciples, and they hand Jesus to Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who have never been heard of prior to that. They were the only persons to handle Jesus' body, with the exception of Mary Magdalene subsequently. Now, if they were aware that Jesus was still alive, they weren't going to shout out that Jesus would be alive, would they? Because then the Jews would make sure that, look, he would be dead. They need to kill him now. So the Jews are suspicious. They thought, look, maybe he might not have died, so what happens? The tomb was in easy reach. Helping hand with the secret disciples. His legs were not broken, but the legs of his crossmates were broken, meaning their deaths were quickened. And Jesus had obtained quick and easy permission by Pilate to obtain the body of Jesus, which means that if Pilate had known that Jesus had been alive, maybe he could have been alive, he would have given him the benefit of the doubt and given him to Joseph of Arimathea. Why? Because he had no personal grudge against Jesus. Bearing in mind that he was reluctant to have Jesus crucified. So what happened? The Jews come to Pilate, but they come 24 hours too late. They felt they were cheated. So they stayed. Now the next day, the chief priests and Pharisees, they come together and Pilate say, "Sir, we remember that what the deceiver said, that he'll rise after 3 days. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest the last error shall be worse than the first error." Last error, first error? What was the error? What was the first error? The first error was they had already lost the day because the horse had, in a manner of speaking, bolted. The first error was that the Jews had permitted Jesus to be brought down from the cross without breaking his legs under the false assumption that he had died. The last error would be to allow the secret disciples of Jesus to give nourishment and to help the wounded man, because in the ordeal that Jesus was, he was in a bad situation, a bad state. And if you give his secret disciples access to him, they would well resuscitate him. But they come late. And that brings us to the next issue. Who moved the stone? God works in mysterious ways. The Quran says, they planned and Allah planned and God planned, and the best of planners is the Almighty. The first error being worse than the last error. They're talking about first and last. Why would they be so concerned? If Jesus was died, he was died. He did, he died. What was the concern? Sunday morning, the first day of the week, according to the Hebrew calculations, Mary Magdalene alone visits the tomb. Question: why does she go to the tomb? Mark tells us that she goes to anoint him. But he had already been embalmed and anointed, so why does she go to the tomb? You look at the Talmud. It tells you why. Why does she go to the tomb? In the Talmud we are told that there was a belief that in certain instances there was a tradition where people go after 3 days to ascertain, to see whether the person was dead or alive. Therefore the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad said, when you carry a dead body, make sure that you basically see, handle it carefully, because you don't know whether it's dead or whether it's alive. They had no technology back then to make the determination. She couldn't have gone to anoint him because both Jews, Christians and Muslims do not massage dead bodies after 3 days. After 3 days, rigor mortis sets in. If she were to go and massage a dead body, then it wouldn't make sense unless we accept that she was going to see a live Jesus. She was about the only woman besides Joseph, Arimathea, Nicodemus, who had seen signs of life in Jesus. And so she basically comes there. And on arrival, she finds that the stone is removed and the winding sheets are unwound. Now, why? Why was the stone removed? Because stone walls do not a prison make, and iron bars do not a cage. For a resurrected body, you don't need to close the tomb. Why was the stone removed? Why were the winding sheets unwound? And so it was an anticlimax to what she had expected. Jesus is there. He sees who she is, and he turns. He says, "Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou?" She turns to him, looks at him, supposing him to be the gardener. Why couldn't she identify Jesus? Do resurrected persons look like gardeners? So why should she suppose Jesus was a gardener? Many scholars have stated that in many instances, you look at Schweitzer, he was disguised as a gardener. Why? Because he was afraid. Why was he afraid of the Jews? Because he didn't die and he didn't conquer death. If he had died and he had conquered death, there would be no need to be afraid. Because it says in the book of Hebrews, it is ordained unto all men once to die, and after that the judgment. You can't die twice. So she approaches him and says, "Sir, if you have taken him hence, tell me where have you laid him, not where have you buried it, where have you laid him, so that I might take him away." I might take him away. Can she carry a corpse, a dead body? embalmed so many hundreds of pounds. Everyone has a particular way of calling their beloved ones, and Jesus said the same. He calls out Mary, and that particular, she immediately recognizes the Master. And he says, touch me not. Touch me not. She lunges out to luncheon. Touch me not. Why not? Because he had gone through a painful ordeal, and it would be hurt even though he had resuscitated. Touch me not. Further on, for I am not yet ascended unto my Father. In the language of the Jew, I am not dead yet. And when they had heard that Jesus was alive, they had heard that Jesus was alive after that, and had been seen by Mary Magdalene, they believed not. How is it possible? They were not eyewitnesses. Mary Magdalene was the eyewitness. And it came to pass later on the road to Emmaus, he sat eating with them. He took bread. They couldn't recognize him. Why not? Blessed it and broke it, and he gave it to them. And they went and told unto the residue of the disciples, and they neither believed them. What could they not believe? Did they not accept that the resurrection? Did they not accept that someone is a ghost after he died? What did they know? They could not believe that someone had died and was alive. He had survived. He was alive. Neither believed they not. So look at this. Mary Magdalene testifies that Jesus was alive. The disciples from Emmaus testified that Jesus was alive. Angels said that Jesus was alive in Luke chapter 24 verse 33. Two men that stood by the woman asked him in Luke 24 verse 4 to 5, why seek ye the living among the dead? Yet they will not believe. What will they not believe? And we told that the two from Emmaus, the disciples, they rose and they returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 gathered together, and those who were with them. Which 11? Which 11 did they find? 11 disciples. He appeared unto them and unto the 11 as they sat by, eating. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 5, the same narration Paul relates, scene of Cephas, then to the 12. Which 11? Judas had long died. So which 11 was he speaking about? Matthias? Matthias was only appointed after Pentecost. Which 11 disciples did they basically appear to? Now, after that incident, we told that Jesus comes, after the encounter at Emmaus, he comes to the upper room, and he appears to the disciples, and he says, peace be unto you. Shalom alaikum, salam alaikum. And we told that the disciples were terrified. Why were 12 men terrified, yet one woman who was an eyewitness was not terrified? Why? Is it perhaps that she had seen the life signs of life from Jesus on the cross? These 12 men were not there. The disciples were not there. They had forsaken and fled. We told in Luke that they were terrified and affrighted because they thought he was a spirit. They thought, if someone dies now, and I hear in the papers he's dead, I see him the next day, what would you think? You'd think he's a ghost. Question, did Jesus look like a spirit? And the answer is no. So why did the disciples of Jesus think the man is a spirit when he didn't look like one? Why? Why should they think the man is a spirit when he didn't look like one? The answer is because the disciples were not eyewitnesses or ear-witnesses to the happening. They had heard from hearsay that the Master was hanged on the cross. They had heard from hearsay that he was dead and buried for 3 days. They had heard from hearsay that now he had given up the ghost. All their knowledge was from hearsay because Mark tells us they all forsook and fled. So naturally they expect that the person in front of them is a spirit. What does Jesus tell them? He says, behold, have a look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit has no flesh and bones as you see me have. A spirit? What was he trying to prove? A spirit has no flesh and bones as you see me have. What he was telling them was that the body they were seeing was not a translated body, it was not a metamorphosed body, it was not a spiritual body, it was not a resurrected body. Because the resurrected bodies get spiritualized. You want to know who says so? I say Jesus. Who says so? I say Paul. You want references? We can give them to you. How are the dead raised? It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. The emphasis is on the incorporeal nature. That's important. We can all be spiritual. We can all be spiritually minded. That's not what Jesus was talking about here. He was saying, a spirit has no flesh and bones as you see me have. What's he trying to prove? And they felt him and believed not for joy and wondered what happened. And he says, have you anything to eat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish and a honeycomb. And he took it and he ate. To prove what? That his spirit, that he is not resurrected, that he was alive, that he had been through an ordeal. Albert Schweitzer, in his book In Quest for the Historical Jesus, said, if Christ had only eaten to show that he could eat, it would be something docetic, a make pretense, what the Hindus would say, Leela. What was the implications of him basically going and proving? What was he trying to prove? What was he trying to indicate? A spirit has no flesh and bones, as you see me have. When someone says a spirit has no flesh and bones, does it mean it has flesh and bones? And 8 days later he appears to Thomas. Thomas doesn't believe, the doubting Thomas. So he says, Thomas, reach hither thy finger, put it into my side, and put it into the print of my hands, and be not faithless, but believe what? He couldn't believe what the disciples had seen 8 days ago in the upper room. That Jesus was alive, that he had survived by the skin of his teeth, based on the actual gospel accounts. Vaticinium ex eventum, prophecies after the event. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 38 to 39 to 40, the Jews had come to Jesus and had given him endless trouble, and so they asked him for a sign. They said, Master, Rabbi, we would have a sign from thee. And Jesus reacts very strongly. Very strongly. He says, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. And there shall no sign be given unto it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, in the heart of the earth. Now, sign here is not just a road sign, it's miracle. Sign means miracle. No miracle except the miracle of Jonah. What was the sign of Jonah? If you look at the story of Jonah, God commands Jonah to go to the Ninevites, a city of 100,000 people, warn them to repent in sackcloth and ashes, humble themselves before God. Jonah, being despondent, he feels the Ninevites will not hear him, he goes to